The moment of explosion is approaching fast, and war could break out today or tomorrow. Strong words from the Korean People's Army. But how much is rhetoric and how much is a real threat? Joining us now to help answer that, Eric Margolis, Syndicated international affairs columnist, and of course, to those of you who've watched this program for many years, a mainstay in this studio for going almost 20 years now. So, Eric, great to have you back in that chair.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay, Eric, there's lots of rhetoric from that part of the world a lot of the time, but this week has felt different. What's going on?
Well, the land of the morning calm, as Korea is known, ain't so calm. This is the most violent vituperation that we have seen going back and forth with overt threats of war. It's unusual and it's dangerous. Not that, you know, sticks and stones won't kill, but words won't kill, but this is building up into something where an accident, a chance encounter at sea or in the air could lead to an actual shooting war.
Did something happen in the last couple of weeks to up the tone of the rhetoric much more than usual?
Absolutely.
What was it?
Every year in March, the U.S., South Korea, and now Australia hold war games in South Korea, but right up on the border. And every year the North Koreans go ballistic when this happens and rattle their cage and make all kinds of dire threats that nobody listens to. Now, this year, the U.S. sent first a flight of B-52 heavy bombers, which brought back memories of the B-29 plastering of Korea during the Korean War. Secondly, a B-2 stealth bomber skirted again within 30 kilometers, I think, of the border of North Korea. And these are planes, stealth bombers, that can carry the 30,000-pound Moab bomb, known as the mother of all bombs, right, that are designed to decapitate a leadership in an underground bunkers. So this was a pointed message to the young Kim Jong-un, and he did not react with morning calm.
But these kinds of messages have been delivered in the past, and they haven't necessarily provoked this kind of response. What's different this time? He
and the new old leadership have decided what they're doing. I call it an attempted prison break. What they're doing is they're creating so much trouble, so many threats, that they're trying to force the United States to enter into direct negotiations with North Korea, to normalize relations with North Korea, and end 60 years of economic sanctions. Really, the U.S. has been waging this kind of war against Korea all this time, and Korea's trying to break out of it.
If you were advising President Obama, would you tell him, time to go to North Korea and have a meeting with this guy? This tension has gone on long enough.
Definitely. I was in Doha in the Gulf recently, and I had dinner with Governor Bill Richardson, presidential candidate. He had just come back from North Korea, and we were talking about it. And, he said, absolutely, this is the course that we should follow with the North Koreans. All they want, a phone call would resolve this whole thing.
Well, they got Dennis Rodman. That wasn't enough?
Well, apparently not. It was a very intelligent, interesting beginning, should have been followed up, but Washington immediately poo-pooed the visit and didn't.
If North Korea, let's take them at their word for a second. They are threatening military strikes on the U.S. and its allies. If they were to strike, what would they target?
North Korea can't touch North America, as far as generally known. They may not have any nuclear warheads that can be fitted on top of missiles. They expect to have only about 4 or 5 of them. And boy, if you use them, you better have some backup. Otherwise, you'll run out, and just when the enemy's counterattacking. They can perhaps, with a nuclear weapon, threaten South Korea and Japan, which is the key place. With conventional weapons, the North Koreans can, first of all, they have 14,000 heavy guns and rocket launchers dug in along the demilitarized zone. I was just there recently. We were filming, and they're dug into caves. And they can pour tens of thousands of shells every hour on Seoul, which is only 30...
It's an hour away, right?
An hour's drive away from the DMZ. Can level large parts of the Korean capital, can attack 28,000 American troops who are based in Korea, who, by the way, have been there for 60 years. Talk about Rome's lost legions.
But they've kept the peace.
They say they have kept the balance, in North Asia. They're also vulnerable. They're within range of Kim's guns. And then there are the U.S. bases. They're threatening to attack U.S. bases in the Okinawa region and as far away as Guam and in Japan.
Could you tell us, I guess nobody knows for sure what would happen, right, if something were to break out, but can you tell us what the United States, through treaty, claims to be obligated to do if South Korea were attacked?
Very interesting question, Steve. The U.S. is treaty bound to come to South Korea's defense in the event of war. Now, how do you define war? Well, I guess a lot of shooting and serious military action. The U.S. is also treaty bound to defend Japan. So that's why this fracas in the Ryukyu Islands with China, between China and Japan, is also very scary for the Americans, because now they're being pulled forward by the nose into conflicts they don't want. Interesting point. The North Koreans accuse South Korea of being an American colony, and they're the only authentic Koreans. Well, up until 2 years ago, the South Korean army, 600-odd thousand men, it was under command of an American four-star general. And in wartime, the entire South Korean armed forces come under American military command, shades of the Warsaw Pact.
Well, language is important in these things, obviously, and I want to pick up on something you just said, which is the United States is obliged to come to the aid and defense of South Korea and Japan in the event of war. Now, that doesn't mean a skirmish at the border. Doesn't presumably that mean a full-fledged declaration of war?
There might not be a declaration of war. In our day and age, that's become sort of gone with the Model T. They're just surprise attacks. And the best understanding, my own study of the situation, is that North Korea would launch a surprise attack once it makes the decision to go. And it would be an attack that would be launched by air and commando troops and amphibious invasion, suicide commando things against all the American and South Korean bases, air bases and headquarters, followed by barrages of missiles, maybe with some chemical warheads, attacks through the DMZ, which would be very bloody, and an armored drive on Seoul. So it would move very rapidly, and it would be designed to do so before the United States could marshal enough forces in the region to counterattack.
But you say a surprise attack. I mean, that border's got a lot of cameras on it. Could you really mount a surprise attack with all the satellite intelligence going on?
Well, you could. You know, interestingly, Steve, I have, some years back, I was with the South Korean 1st Division up on the DMZ, and they showed me these tunnels that the North Koreans had dug secretly underneath the DMZ. They can move a 12,000-man North Korean division in an hour, running hunched over through these tunnels and blow out the back, and they come out behind the South Korean troops. So, yeah, they could. And I mean, they've been practicing this for 30 years.
Let me pick up again on something you said earlier about the, I guess, the war, what do you call them, war games or the...
Yeah, war games.
War games. You know, if they do it every year, you can't really say it's a surprise, but would you say that it was unusually and needlessly provocative this year and therefore up the ante in this whole thing?
Yes, they were provocative, and I hate to think of our side being provocative. Usually it's only something that the dirty commies do, but we were being very provocative, and we knew what was going to happen. This was done in part because of North Korea's nuclear test that was done some months back, which caused great upset to the U.S. and Japan and South Korea. So this was our way of sort of showing them, hey, you know, either behave or else.
The two leaders in question, North Korea and South Korea, are very new on the scene. And I wonder how much their inexperience is factoring into all of this.
Well, that's another good question, Steve. Everybody says, you know, the boy leader of North Korea is only 27, 28, and he just inherited. Well, come on, Alexander the Great was, I think, 28 when he conquered a good part of the world. So, but he is inexperienced, but he is a very experienced cadre of people, all these unsmiling guys standing around him are important. The new president of South Korea, President Park, first female president, is very inexperienced, but her father was the dictator of South Korea, who really raised South Korea from dire poverty and began its modern miracle of industrialization. She was almost like his first lady, so she has some experience. But she said something very worrisome. She said any North Korean provocation will be met with immediate military response. She boxed herself into a corner, was intemperate and inexperienced, and it made matters worse.
Can you tell what the North's endgame is here?
The North's endgame, as I suggested initially, is to rattle their cage so much and cause so much trouble at a time when the United States is mired in the Middle East. You know, all its troops are over there. It's got no money, and so it's a good time to do it. They're trying. The long-term objective is to establish that the U.S. to recognize the North Korean regime, which it never has done. Secondly, to establish normal diplomatic relations. Third, to end the economic siege by sanctions of North Korea, and to accept that it's a legitimate government.
And is the South's endgame eventual unification of the whole country?
It is and it isn't. The South Koreans, and particularly senior officials and intelligence officials to whom I've spoken, are of two minds. One is, yeah, it would be great to be reunified. It's like St. Augustine saying, oh, Lord, stop me from sinning, but not quite yet. And they're terrified of what they call in South Korea unexpected reunification, which means the whole place collapses and 25 million starving people come pouring over the border or head for Japan. So they're actually propping up the North Korean government in the hopes that there will be gradual change, and eventually one day when North Korea's economy is improved, that they'll be able to reunify.
Okay, during the Cold War, obviously, MAD was the prevailing doctrine, right? Mutually assured destruction, and that prevented the Soviets, theoretically, prevented the Soviets and the United States from blowing each other to smithereens. Does MAD work here?
Oh, I think it does. Mutually assured well, it's not mutually assured destruction because the North Koreans can't destroy the United States.
No, but they can destroy the South.
They can definitely destroy South Korea and Japan. 2 nuclear weapons, one on Tokyo, one in the south of Japan, would completely wipe out Japan. But so it is a sort of a Mexican or a Korean standoff, if you want to call it that. And it's good. Nuclear weapons are useless. They're only good for posturing like this. But the North Koreans found, they said, look, Libya got invaded, Iraq got invaded, regimes overthrown, they had no nuclear weapons. We're going to make sure that we can cause enough damage to take down the whole neighborhood if necessary.
There's a map up on the screen right now, and do you know where the nuclear weapons that the North Koreans are alleged to have, where they might be siloed or located?
Well, they're located, if you look at from Pyongyang, sort of going in a northeast bias up towards the coast. They're mostly in that area with some installations up near the Chinese border.
So no difficulty, obviously, reaching Seoul or Japan from there?
None.
You could do that easily. Okay. Here's what Kishore Mahbubani wrote in the Financial Times recently. I want to read this to you. He just wrote this the other day. He said, every wise leader throughout history has found a way to talk to their enemies. North Korea is a scary country, and it is hard to know how seriously to take its threats. But it is even harder if you do not talk to it. The time has come for the U.S. to follow the wisdom of the ages and engage North Korea. So you told us earlier you thought that Barack Obama should engage in direct talks with North Korea. Is anybody in the administration considering this approach at the moment?
Not that I've heard. And in fact, they're distracted with other things. And there is a powerful group of neoconservatives in Washington who are totally against any negotiations or friendly behavior with North Korea because they fear that North Korea can supply arms to the enemies of Israel in the Middle East.
Is that a legitimate concern?
In a minor way, not a major, but down the road it could be a significant concern. But there's no pro-North Korean faction. Nobody dares. It's like supporting child molesters. They've been so vilified that nobody can say anything about them. But it's childish not to have regular relations with a country. I mean, the U.S. is in bed with all kinds of ugly regimes like Uzbekistan, where they boil people alive, and Azerbaijan, and look, Saudi Arabia, where they're going to paralyze somebody in some horrible case and cut off people's heads. What
do those three countries have in common?
They're all close American allies.
Why?
Because
lots of oil.
And strategically located,
True.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, all right. But look on the other side. If presumably the photo op between Kim Jong-un and Barack Obama is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, is it not fair for the United States to say, we're not going to give you that unless we see some significant changes in your behavior? Is that fair?
Well, yes, and yes, it is fair, and the U.S. should do that. North Korea is an awful regime. It's a major violator of human rights. It's a detestable regime, but we've got to deal with it, as bad as it is. And the Republicans have to be grown up enough to keep their mouths shut and not scream and say Obama's coddling the commie killers, which of course they will.
Is there any mileage in the South/United States invading the North as the United States invaded Iraq?
Yes, there is. In the U.S. military and in the warlike circles in the Republican Party, the crusaders within the Republic want to invade. We'll show them. You know, you have to think of this. This is a test of wills between the 330 million Americans and 24,500,000 North Koreans. And America can't be seen to be faced down by such a pipsqueak country. So America's a great world empire, and the empire can't be forced back from its position by South Korea, North Korea. So yes, invade North Korea. Let's march on Pyongyang, our high-tech, so we'll wipe them out in days. Well, the Pentagon did estimates about around 2002, and they said a U.S. land invasion of North Korea, a very hilly, rocky country where everything is dug in, with a 1.1 million man army, very tough. This is not Iraq, not a paper tiger, that the Americans would probably suffer 250,000 casualties. And a war like this would cost only Kim Jong-il knows how much for the bankrupt United States.
Okay, in our last minute here, let's talk about China. The United States' great hope is that China was going to get in there and somehow moderate North Korea's behavior. Hasn't seemed to work so far. What role do you think China can play?
China has played probably a somewhat moderating role on North Korea. It supplies all of North Korea's oil and food, so it has great leverage as well as influence. And traditionally, Korea is a subsidiary state of China. China is the grandmaster, and they're like the father-son relationship. China will play this role behind the scenes, but there's no way that China wants to see the North Korean regime collapse, and it doesn't want to see South Korea absorb North Korea, doesn't want to see American troops and bases based in North Korea. So I think China will continue its present policy.
Status quo is good for China.
Yes.
Gotcha. Eric, great to see you again. Thanks for helping us out with this one.
Thank you, Steve.
That's Eric Margolis, the Syndicated columnist and foreign correspondent.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.